Hey, cool kids. Welcome back into the Cool Grandpa podcast. This week, I'm excited to have Don Akchin sitting down with us to talk about his new book, The Afterwork: Finding Fulfilling Alternatives to Retirement. Now, Don is also the author of a very popular blog called The Endgame, and that's over on Substack. With this book, we get into the fact that as the silent generation and baby boomers and then Generation X coming afterwards, that a lot of times when we go into traditional retirement years, somewhere around the 60s, let's say, and I know people retire earlier, people retire later, but what we get into is understanding that once you hit retirement, typically you're going to have another 20, 30 years or even more that you can have an impact on your family, on your community, and everybody around you. So we are privileged to sit down, get some of Don's insights, find out how and why he wrote this book, and really dig into some thought-provoking questions such as how do we start to prepare for retirement or life after retirement? So you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Don. Don's a previous guest, so I'm going to have his background information that we covered in the first podcast. I'm going to have that into the show notes. So after you listen to this, you can go back, listen to that first conversation that I had with Don, talking about really his experience with being a grandfather, as well as his experience with writing that popular blog, The Endgame. So be sure to check those out. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Don. Hi, Don. Welcome back to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you back.
It's great to be here, Greg. Thank you.
Now, we are celebrating a brand new book that is sure to help grandparents and soon to be grandparent age type folks. And that work or that book is called After Work. And Don, I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about what is After Work. Just set the stage with what that concept is.
Well, it starts with the idea that the retirement that our parents and our grandparents knew is, for all practical purposes, dead for us. Because, first of all, it was supposed to be the beginning of the end. Nobody was expected to live a long time, and actuarial tables were built on that expectation. Now we are looking at longevity such that from the time we retire, we may have 25 or 30 more good years. And that's a long time to spend at the beach or playing golf or pickleball or anything like that. So I call it the after work because in my mind, retirement was about the beginning of the end. The after work is not the end of anything. It's the beginning of something new and exciting if we choose to use it for that.
Right, right. And I love that you brought up if we choose to use it, because I think we've both run into people that are just kind of existing or coasting along, maybe, or don't have an identity and they're just kind of there. And that's such a shame, in my opinion.
Well, it happens to a lot of people, especially men who have been very career driven. One of the things that this culture allows us men to do is to let everyone else handle the details. So we're allowed to just focus on the very thing we have in front of us, which is our work. What happens, though, is when that work stops and we haven't thought for a minute about what comes after, now there's this big hole in our lives where work used to be. And there's no guidance, there's no structure, there's no expectation about what you're supposed to do with it. And for a lot of people, that is a real issue and an emotional issue and a psychological issue that is very hard to deal with.
Yeah, I think too, we wind up just in, I think it's a natural kind of event that we start whenever we're, let's say, out of high school, even when people go, oh, hey, what do you do? Well, I'm a doctor, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. And
Right.
the career or the project or whatever we're working on, that's the thing that we are, which it really isn't, but it becomes so ingrained in us that we have trouble sometimes separating, especially later in life.
Well, if you've ever been to a party and somebody says, "What do you do?" and you say, "I'm retired," you know how lame that sounds. So it's not really satisfying to anyone. But what I do suggest is that once we get over the hump, the transition into the after work, there are a lot of wonderful things we could be doing, in particular to pick up things that we left behind years ago because we had to do adulting things. And here we are in a period where the adulting's already done, pretty much. The student loans are paid off, we hope. The kids are out of school and out of the house, we hope. And the fate of the world is not dependent on our success. We can mess around and fail a little bit and flail a little bit and make mistakes and try different things, and it's okay. The world won't end, and it's good for us. So my proposition is that this is a great time to recapture your old self that you may have left behind. In my own case, for example, I decided at the age of 7 that I was going to be a writer. I called it a serious and lingering case of authoritis. And when I announced this to my mother about 5 years later, she said, "Oh, no, you don't want to do that. You need to get a job because writers don't make any money." And I came back, I thought, well, I've got it. I'll work as a newspaper person. Then it's a job and I still get to write. And I went down that path. I didn't stay in newspapers all that long, but I did lots of things where I wrote for other people and did that for 45 years, only to leave behind the idea of being the creative writer. So I'm saying that this is a time when if you ever wanted to try your hand at being a musician, start that rock group now, you know? It's not too late. You want to be a potter? Go play with the clay. Or if you thought you'd always like to be a teacher, well, this is not a bad time to just check it out. So that's really the thrust of the book is there are lots of ways you can pursue a meaningful and a purposeful life in this gift of extra years that we've been given.
Absolutely. And along those lines too, if I was sitting down with you, I'm still got some time ahead of me work wise, and we were having a conversation, would you be advising me to start looking into those things before I hit retirement, or maybe after retirement, give myself that space to go explore a lot of different things?
Well, either way works. I mean, I think a lot of people start playing around with some of these ideas. Maybe they want to start a new business. They start playing around and doing the groundwork before they leave the job or an artistic career of some kind. Sure, it's something you can do in your spare time and then pursue it when you have more time. Somebody talked about what they call the fragile years, and I think this speaks to your question. They call it the 5 years before you retire and the first 5 years after you retire as the fragile decade. And I think that's a pretty accurate feeling. You should be, although most of us don't, you should be thinking about what's going to come when the career stops. And if you've planned for it, that's great. You're probably better off. If you are like me and you just wing it, you get to where you're going to be and you say, okay, what do we do now? That's okay too, because the fact is, you can't really imagine what it's going to be like until you get into it. And you're going to be surprised. And all your plans may fall apart because of the death of someone or a physical problem or losses, other surprises that you aren't anticipating, whether you plan or you don't plan. So you need to be flexible and be ready for anything. But to answer your question, planning ahead is certainly a good idea. It's worth a try if you're of that mind.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of different, and it depends on, personality, depends on a lot of different things. But just like I think with financial planners and people that come up and start talking to you about, hey, you're getting closer to retirement, we should probably stop taking all these risks on these penny stocks and, start getting into some bonds or whatever. The same could be true as far as exploring that career. Hey, you're at a point where you might have already had your last promotion or you might have
Mhm.
had your last big thing and you're kind of where you're at. Now's the time to go ahead and go back to start dreaming. Try to connect with that 7-year-old, like you were saying, and start asking those questions. Dream
Sure.
changed.
Well, dreams do change. Mine kind of funny that you asked that question. My dream was I was going to be a novelist. So as soon as I stopped working, I said, I've just gotten a Social Security check, which I consider my federal foundation support to be a writer. And I sat down and I wrote 2 novels. And it wasn't what I was expecting because I like writing, but what I wasn't counting on was how lonely it was when you don't have people around and you can't ask your wife, you can't ask your best friend, you can't ask your kids, is this any good? So you spend a couple of years on each project not knowing if it's trash or if it's treasure. Then you finish and you send it out to agents and to publishers, and you get 60 rejections piling up, and you start to think, oh my God, this isn't what I was counting on at all. Where's my Garrett on the park? You know, where's my dinner with Thomas Wolfe?
Right.
It wasn't what I was expecting. And I got lucky. Along the way, I found a creative coach who was doing an online group, essentially. It was a writers group or a creatives group. And she was giving us instruction. She was teaching us some things about meditation. And it was also a feedback loop. And early on in that experience, somebody said, well, if it takes so long to write something before anyone sees it, why don't you try shorter stuff? And I said, duh, why didn't I think of that? And about that time, I discovered Substack, which was a perfect medium for people who wanted to do like newsletters. And newsletters I knew something about. So I started writing about aging. I wrote a piece a week on Substack, and it was perfect. It was that perfect blend of the right vehicle and I found the right voice and the right audience, and it was just it all worked. And so it was like age 69, I finally find how to put it all together. But it wasn't where I expected it.
I think that's one of these lessons that we learn a little bit later, and maybe we're more accepting of it, is that the plans don't always turn out the way we want, but they turn out somehow, is I
Yes.
guess what I'm getting to.
Yes, you can't be too dogmatic about what your dreams have to be. You have to roll with it. And as I said, this is fact of resilience is a really important one. The ability to roll with the punches and adapt as you go along and be flexible is really important for us at this age as we face what's essentially a situation that we've never faced before.
And do you find that reaching for that creativity spark and that gift that we had as kindergartners, and I know it's almost a cliche, but that we really need that as we get into this life of after work, that you have to try so many different things that may or may not work versus a lot of us get into a career path and we tend to stay in that same industry even if we move around a little bit, and suddenly because we have options now, we have to get creative a little bit.
Well, I think that's true. And everyone can be creative. I'm sure there are a lot of people who think, oh, no, not me. But I think that what's really important is what, if you've ever done any Buddhism, they call beginner's mind. And it's like being a 7-year-old again and seeing things for the first time and being open-minded and not having expectations about how it's going to be. I just read a really nice essay a few hours ago by a writer who talked about how she took a break from writing at one point to just work with pottery and paint it. And it was so freeing for her because it didn't matter whether it was good or bad. It was hers, and she could declare it finished in a way that she couldn't when she was writing. And that was an example of what beginner's mind can do.
I love that. And I love too somebody else that people probably know the name, Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs and all that. But he talks about his mother, now that she's like 80, has had 3 New York Times bestsellers. She had started writing and just kept kind of picking away at it, picking away. But then as she started that writing, and then it was so late in life to get that out there and start working on it. It's just to me, it's an example that jumps out.
That's a good one. And now that I've written my first book ever, I'm looking forward to becoming an overnight sensation at 74.
Well, I
It
think
does take time sometimes.
it does, especially when you don't have a well-known son,
Yeah, well,
which is something I remind my kids about all the time.
there you go.
What we've talked a little bit about what we can do as both professionals as well as tradespeople, whatever our backgrounds are. How are some of the ways that people can use that hard learned experience to really give back to some of the people that are coming up behind us that are still learning, maybe trying a new career, maybe trying a new job?
Well, one thing that's always a good alternative to doing something for money is volunteering. There are thousands of nonprofits who do the very hard and difficult work of tying the threads in our culture that nobody else will do because it doesn't make money to do those things. And they do them and they take care of people's health and they take care of people's upbringing and education. And volunteering is a great way, A, to meet people, new people, B, to try your hand at something new, and finally to feel like you're giving back. It's I'm always amazed when people listen to me and say, and act like I have something profound to say, but it is possible. My kids will never admit that I have anything wise to say, but other people's kids will. And that's good to know too.
It is. I think I'm in the same boat with you with regards to the sons. They'll listen to my best friend, but when it comes to me giving the same advice, it's like, what are you talking about?
We have built-in disadvantages.
When we're in this period of after work and life after work, one of the items that tends to come up in our discussions is that about legacy. And how do you start to think and start to mold what it is that legacy is? Because I think it's different if we're thinking about 30-year-old, right? And talking to that person, what do you want to leave? A couple of $1 million in the bank and a big house and these things, which are great. But of course, age changes that.
I think about that a lot, and I can't say that I have perfect answers yet, but it's very much on my mind. To me, it's always been about values, setting an example by the way that I live my life that shows other people what values I consider important. And I first started doing that when I was 40, and again, with kids in mind, I was realizing that I could talk all I wanted to about, I value this, I value that, but they weren't going to believe me unless they saw it. It it's walk the walk or talk the talk. I needed to walk it. So I became a more active volunteer at that point because I needed to illustrate what it was I was talking about. I don't know if that took or not. I've got one child that's very family oriented and not hungry for money. I've got another child who is putting the good fight to work, working for people who are renters and are being taken advantage of by their landlords. So maybe some of those lessons took.
Well, I think so. I think we sometimes feel like we discount the examples we set by what we do versus, some of our conversations. Because to your point, I think grandchildren and children, they pick up more about what we do versus what we say.
I hope so. Well, and I hope I'm doing the right things.
It sounds like you are anyway. I wanted to ask you too about some of the tools and practices that maybe you've come across that help people find what purpose, what defines them with after work. And that could be changing multiple times in that 20 to 30 years. But what are some of the things that you found that are helpful for somebody?
Well, I think the first thing we were talking before about financial planners. And one of the problems with retirement planning has been that it was considered a synonym for financial planning. And there wasn't much being done about the emotional or the psychological issues that you have to deal with. My book is really geared to the non-financial issues. And one of the things that I have discovered is that because financial planning had its limitations in preparing for this, a new profession has come along called retirement coaching. And these are people who have done done some study of how to be a coach and know the issues and are very good at helping people center in on what really matters to them and what makes them happy and what gives them joy and helping them identify those things so that they can move forward. Some people call it purpose. Other people say, I don't need a purpose. I'm just here for my grandchildren. That's a purpose too. But it's hard to live for many, many years if you don't have something that gives you meaning and that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning. And the coaches are very, very good at getting people who may not be great at introspection to really look a little deeper and find and re-identify those things that turned them on and made them glow and when they were kids or earlier in their life.
Boy, that could be a tough trick to do, is to get somebody to look inwards, because sometimes, because sometimes we have put those ideas and those dreams off for so long that there can be feelings and emotions around, well, why did I take this career path, or why did I go this way versus do what was in my heart at the time? And I think this gets to where I'm going with this is, it can take a little bit of work to come to peace with choices and decisions and where things are, but then also the optimism of where you can go.
I think that's true. And it is hard. Men who have been raised to be Marlboro men who never speak and keep their thoughts inside and the cliche. Introspection comes hard for some of us. I personally, I've been introspecting my whole life. It drives me crazy. But some people have a real hard time with that. And a good coach finds easy ways to get you going with that and makes it very much about your feelings that you may have forgotten or things that things that were important to you once that you may have left behind, and are they still important?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I like to always think that we're similar to a piece of art that's just always in process or progress, right? We're not quite done, and it's okay if things aren't quite so perfect, because you can always smooth something out, or you can always add a feature, or whatever you need to do, you can do it.
Yes, I knew several people in my youth who called themselves goddess in progress.
I like that. I like
Yeah.
it. One of the challenges that people can have sometimes as we go into retirement and we start to get a little bit older in general is our social connections change. Especially, I think probably men and women both have this, but I think maybe we experience differently, is the work friends maybe start to disappear when we leave the firm or we stop working, or what we do. What are some ways, and how do you advise people on how to build those social connections back up?
Well, I think it is one of the most puzzling things to people when they leave work is that it's like you've stepped off the train and all of the people that you were at work with are still on it and it's going out the distance and you're still there on the tracks watching it go and you're not a part of it anymore. And therefore, they're not your friends forever. You're out of sight, you're out of mind. There's no daily contact. That's a hard thing for a lot of people. And many men, too, who like me depend on their wives to manage their social life. If they don't have a wife, they are at a loss as to how to go about it. There are lots of ways, though. There are technology has given us the meetup group where you can find people with a similar interest. There again, volunteering is really good because it's similar to work, but it doesn't have the same kind of pressures and that sort of thing to it. But you meet people, you do something for people. It's good. I have also read, and this seems to be very, very much in the news these days, that social support makes a huge difference in how long you live. People who have good social support and regularly are in contact with people do much better in life. Isolation of older folks is a terrible problem, and it leaves people at a real disadvantage, and their health suffers, and they don't last as long. So, in any way you can, it's really important to have social connections and to keep them current. I personally like to find younger friends whenever I can because I want someone to be able to get me to the hospital when I need who can still drive, you know? My
Right.
friends are getting older.
Right, right. No, no, that's important. And I love that you brought that up because it reminds me of when I was an undergrad and we would sometimes have these older people come and sit in our class. And what I didn't know at the time was the university allowed people that were retired to come in and basically audit the class, which is just
Mhm.
come in, sit for the lectures, contribute, but they weren't working on a degree. And it was so fascinating because we'd have these times where I would sit down with some of the older gentlemen and just hear their stories and listen to them and hear what things were like when they were working professionally in the 50s and the 60s. So I did have some connections with some older people. And, I just want to give a shout out that, hey, if you're older, don't be afraid of the younger crowd either. Go in and introduce yourself because people want to hear your stories.
They do. And while they may have some really difficulty understanding some of the old ways that things were done before cell phones and internet and wireless and all of that, there is wisdom that we have to share. And for people who are going through their first crisis, oh my God, the stock market just dropped. Or, oh my God, we can't get gas and gas costs $5 a gallon. Oh my, what are we going to do? It's helpful to have somebody who says, been there, done that. You'll get through. It just changes.
Absolutely. And part of those classes I was at, I'm a old history buff, and which is almost a cliche now that I'm as old as I am. But even when I was younger, going through my undergrad, it was a history and sociology major. And having these people that had been through some of those experiences that we hear about and had lived through it could add a little bit of color to the context that the teachers were providing us.
Well, it makes it more real because it's not a two-dimensional picture or two-dimensional text in a book. You have a lived experience. And it reminds you it wasn't really that long ago. It was within the lifetime of someone that is still with us.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great thing to be is if the university or colleges, community colleges have programs, you might be interested in going in auditing a class. I'd just throw that out there as a suggestion.
And there are a number of programs that mostly universities are sponsoring that are adult learning, strictly for people who are in their retirement or after work years. They're all over the country and they're often taught by college professors and they are good. And one of the other keys to living a long and happy life is remaining curious, always learning. That's something I think I've learned in what I'm doing. I'm always reading and learning new stuff, and that's really key. Curious, yeah.
Absolutely. And to your point, right? When you're exploring different things, were there classes when you were younger that you wish you'd taken? Maybe a creative writing
Mm,
course or but that didn't fit in with your, accounting program.
right.
And so now, hey, it's a great opportunity to go back and do that.
Yeah, I wanted to learn Chinese language, and I was told that it would take 4 years to really be able to be fluent. Said, don't have 4 years. Now I've got as much time as I want.
So have you started learning Chinese?
I have not, but
Okay.
it's on the table.
Well, there you go. And now it's out on the internet and everything too. So, watch out.
Okay.
But yeah, no, that's fantastic. I do know that there are areas where I want to go back in and learn more when I do have that time. So that is, I think, something good to be looking forward to, just like you mentioned with the after work, right? We want to be looking forward and not looking behind us.
Right. I think that's the most important thing is that this is not the end. We have many good days ahead of us if we desire to use them.
Sure. I'd like to circle back around a little bit on the volunteerism and
Okay.
talk to you a little bit about what are some of the ways that you found people were volunteering their time and their expertise back to the community.
Well, people who have been in business and who have developed special skills are very much needed by nonprofit organizations who are generally run by good-hearted people who don't know how to work the spreadsheet, don't know how to keep the books straight, don't know how to keep the feds from coming after them because they didn't file their taxes on time. People with an accounting background or a business background, that's really valuable. And organizations, many of them are not sophisticated. Many of them would like to be more sophisticated. So there's always room to bring a professional approach, even as simple as how to organize, how to get things done, how to do a screening process for new applicants. They're all mysteries to many people who got into the work because they loved helping people, and then they find themselves managing people who help people, but they don't really know how to do it the right way. So volunteers who can be board members and guide them are very, very much valued.
For sure. I spent a little bit of time in some nonprofit work, and a lot of that executive director's job is raising money and not as
Uh-huh.
much on the operations as maybe they'd like to do. So having that board member that can help straighten some things out and even just be a mentor for them as far as the management side of things. Because to your point,
Yes.
they got into whatever they're into because they're super passionate about the mission. But then along the way, the practicality of like, how do you run an organization to fulfill the mission comes into play.
It's especially those organizations that grow and want to sustain that growth and keep growing. It becomes harder for the people who founded the organization to manage something that's gotten beyond their normal area of expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. Don, what is an example or what is something that popped out while you were writing this book that was a little bit of an aha moment for you? Maybe it was a surprise. Maybe it was something that was like, how come I didn't realize this was so obvious?
One thing that has come to me most recently is that part of the problem people who have been career focused have in the afterwork is the lack of structure. That had not occurred to me, but if you don't have a calendar or you don't have regular meetings that fill up your calendar, places you have to go, people you have to see, then what you're looking at is this big 8 to 12 hour day with nothing on it, and you don't know where to start. So one of the first issues is deciding what matters, setting your priorities, and then putting a structure together that you can fall back on so that you have a meaningful day. Otherwise, you may just stay in bed because there's nothing to do, and you don't want to do that.
Right. It gets overwhelming when suddenly you have choice throughout your day and you don't have a management meeting at 9 and you don't have a business lunch at 11:30 and you don't have these things.
Yeah,
Yeah, it sounds great.
one of the ironies of freedom is that when you can do anything, you might end up doing nothing because you can't decide. And sometimes that seems to be, hey, congratulations, you're in the afterwork. Anything is possible. Great. Well, just how about a suggestion? Give
Right.
me one thing I can do.
Right. Well, and to that point though, do you suggest people put like a little bit of a timeline for, let's say you got the big retirement party coming up the 1st of November and okay, do you like to tell people, hey, take the first 90 days and have a blank calendar, and that's okay, but then get in and start filling it in afterwards?
I don't presume to tell anybody how to do it because everybody does it differently. But my wife is an extreme planner. And when she realizes she was going to retire, she started talking to people about a consulting career before she left. And within 2 months of her retiring, she had it all set up. And she's been going gangbusters ever since. She's an extreme example. I'm the opposite end. I'm a winger. I just wade in and say, "Oh, here we are. What now?" And then kind of hope that it all works out for the best. And sometimes it does. But I don't recommend one way or the other. Everybody has a different need. Everybody has a different structure.
When
But
I
I
get
do hope that everybody finds some guidance that gives them a clue as to how they can work this great period of time for their own enjoyment and their own satisfaction.
For sure. And I guess that's part of the introspective work that maybe you do a little bit before retirement, that maybe you don't know that, hey, I'm a real planner at heart. Enjoy having my calendar filled up, whether it was me or somebody else. And
Yeah,
you get to that point.
yeah. It would be nice to know that about yourself.
For sure. Well, and I mean, because it becomes such a strength, and I'm sure your spouse will, or in partner would be the first one to tell you that I could have told you this. You didn't need to spend 3 weeks sitting on a mountaintop thinking about it.
We all have our own processes.
Don, as we start to wrap this up, is there anything about the after work that you would like to talk about that maybe I haven't asked you?
No, I think the thing that I've realized is that those of us who are in the baby boom generation are going into terra incognita. We haven't had a pattern for this kind of life after work before, so we are inventing it as we go along. And it's a worldwide demographic shift that's happening. Normally, when you look at the demographics of a people or a country, it's a pyramid with lots and lots of young people on the bottom, and then the sides sort of work their way up toward a point, and at the top there's just a few old people. That's not where we are. This is a world where for the first time it's more like a square. There are as many old people as there are young people. And that's interesting because our current people who are getting old now are the first generation to live with this and are realizing that they're in a new situation in a world that was built for younger people. It wasn't built for a strong generation of 20% older people. And that's going to cause some friction. It will probably cause some structural change. And we're figuring it out as we go along. There's no right answers yet. And this is not unlike what we had to do in our 20s and 30s as in the boomer years. We were sort of experimenting for the first time with something new then. So I guess it's just our fate that we have to blaze the trails. And as one of my old bosses used to say, you can always tell the pioneers they're the ones with the arrows in their back.
Yes, for sure. And well, it's interesting you brought that up because I was talking with another friend of mine this weekend, and we're Generation X, right? And I
Okay.
brought up the fact that I am so thankful for the boomers because without them, the hip replacements, the spinal surgeries, the knee replacements, all these things that help keep us moving along, that had to be pioneered, and there had to be a big enough population to actually push it. So it's like I was giving some thanks to the boomers for going through and pushing at least the medical side of things that like.
Well, I think it's going to be true of a lot of things. We're really seeing some things that are in our culture that have been traditional, like ageism, really under pressure now because people are perfectly fit to work longer, and many of them will, even though companies are not hiring people after a certain age in many cases. There's friction there, and something's going to give.
There certainly is. I'd be curious too. It'll be fun to watch what happens because I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little shadow entrepreneurship bubble or something that comes from people that would be traditionally in their after work years looking around going, hey, I want to be doing something. And to your point, starting a new business, starting a new career, going into consulting.
And statistically, people who are older and doing startups are more successful than young startups.
We've got more tread on the shoes than some of the younger folks.
Like I said, we've been there, we've done that, we've seen it before.
Don, I know you've got the in-game blog. Where's the best way that people can find you, get a hold of you, get this copy of After Work?
I have a website which is just donakchin.com. You have to spell it right. It's Akchin. And I have there a link to the end game, and I have a link to the book, which is available on Amazon. And that's your one-stop shop.
Okay. And we'll be sure to put that into the show notes as well, because we know people are on treadmills and cutting grass and doing all sorts of things while they listen to us converse.
All right. That would be great. I appreciate that.
And Don, any last comments, any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
I think we've covered a lot of ground, Greg, and I think we've said it pretty well.
Awesome. Well, I've enjoyed this second conversation with you, and I know this is going to be a big help to people listening in who are at that point of planning for after work or are experiencing it now.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate having a chance to tell people about it.
That was a great conversation with Don. I really enjoyed getting his insights, especially around the idea of having people, whether they're coaches or mentors, starting to work with us as we head closer to actually defining a date for retirement. These people can oftentimes be really helpful to bring clarity into what we want to do next. Whether it's sitting on the beach for about 3 or 4 months, or it's moving right into a consulting gig, or it's moving into starting a whole new enterprise or adventure in your life, whatever that might be for you. I think Don really had some pearls of wisdom there for us about making sure that we have those connections in place, as well as really taking advantage of some of the knowledge that's already there to help us plan for a successful retirement, not just financially, but really emotionally, as well as an impact. It was great having Dawn on. The best way you can help out support this show is to go over to the Cool Grandpa podcast website. That's at cool-grandpa.us. Check out my bookstore. Not only is the children's book there, but I've got t-shirts, polo shirts like the one I've got on if you're watching this on YouTube. I've got ball caps, glasses, mouse pads, some different little things to really make sure that people know that you're a cool grandpa, or that you can purchase to give to that cool grandpa in your life. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Go check out Don's book. Be sure to go and subscribe to The End Game. That's Don's blog. Until next time, I want you to remember to stay cool.